I want to turn, Jeff, to you, and I think you have some really illuminating slides that are going to sort of bring the issue of criminal justice and what the business community can do, in addition to getting people off death row, which not that many people in the business community can do. That's something only Ken Frazier can do. But maybe you could explain a little bit.
Let me start out by, we work this problem from the other end. We look at this from the standpoint of how can people with criminal records or coming out of incarceration re-enter the workforce. And the starting point for us is really the economic imperative of growing your workforce. We get this data that you see before you from the Congressional Budget Office, and it represents the growth limitations of the economy over periods of time. And the CBO uses the widely accepted notion that your growth is limited to, is constrained by how fast can you grow your workforce and how productive can they be over the long term, not every year, but over the course of time. And what you'll see in the charts before you, the blue lines are productivity, the green lines are workforce growth. Productivity growth is a result of investment largely, and there are ultimately diminishing returns on investment. You can only grow your productivity by so much. But workforce growth is a matter of demographics largely, and what you'll see is that if you accept the CBO's projections, that last bar on the right says that our growth is going to be constrained in the United States for the next decade on average to 1.9% a year, which is pretty paltry. And we don't fully accept that. But our starting point is observing that the reason our growth has been slowing is because we've been unable to grow our workforce. Now, some of that, of course, is natural. Because we don't have the entry of the baby boomers are exiting, but it's more than that. And this becomes a particularly acute problem today when we're 10 years into this economic expansion and we have to look at our current rate of unemployment. This is the chart, and forgive me, I know not everyone's a chart person. This goes back to 1948. It represents the US rate of unemployment. The vertical gray areas you see are periods of recession. The big white areas between those recessions are, of course, recoveries and expansions. And what I'd ask you to observe is that during those expansions, as you would expect, the unemployment rate goes down and down and down, but then gets stuck. Essentially, we reach a point of full employment. And when you get to full employment, you'll see that typically within a year or 18 months, the next recession comes. So a lot is at stake. And if you were to look at where we are today at a 3.6% unemployment rate, you could easily be led to believe that there's a recession right around the corner. But of course, that's only half of the story. The other story is this concept of labor force participation rate. Again, we go back to 1948, the start of modern data collection in the United States, and you can see that big upswing in the middle of the 80s and 90s was rising labor force participation rates, the entry of the baby boomers, and critically rising female labor force participation rates. That's one of the main reasons we grew so well in those decades. But by 2000, that had tapped out, and we've seen declining labor force participation rates. And that's been an impediment to growth. Here's the thing. If you look at why we've seen declining labor force participation rate, only half of it is explained by the baby boomers exiting the workforce. We started studying this at Fifth Third about 5 years ago, and we came to the conclusion that there were 3 social ills present this cycle in ways that had never been present in modern American economic history. Long-term unemployment, the opioid epidemic, and the incarceration recidivism cycle. We've simply sidelined too many workers that didn't need to be sidelined. And the challenge is, can you bring these people back? When you look at those different populations, the richest opportunity are the people who are underemployed or out of the workforce because they have a criminal record. Different measurements here. You'll see 19 million people have a felony conviction in the United States. You subtract the 2+ million who are currently incarcerated. That's 16+ million Americans with a felony conviction. Now, some of them are in the workforce, but many of them are, almost all of them are underemployed. And we flip this and think of this as an opportunity. And it's fortunately an opportunity that some pioneering small businesses that we've come to know have really capitalized on. And so we've studied businesses. We found that there's a way to reemploy people with records, and that it is not just a macroeconomic benefit, but is a benefit to company bottom lines. People with records, if you can, partnering with nonprofits, employing government agency support, if you can identify the people who are ready to turn their life around and support them with various needs, it's good business. Very, in a time of tight labor and high turnover, low turnover, which means low cost and highly dedicated employees. What's the cost of doing nothing? Well, we need 1.25 million workers a year. Half of that comes from immigration and natural population growth. Where could the rest come from? Well, about 600,000 come out of prisons. No one quite knows the number that come out of jail. Maybe if we were better utilizing those resources. 11.5 million people are using opioids for non-medicinal purposes. 2+ million are addicts. If we could help people get through that. If we don't, this cycle will come to an end. We'll hit this next recession. By our estimate, we're missing at least 2 to 3 million workers. That's a couple of years of extra expansion. What's each year of expansion worth? We're, big round numbers, a $20 trillion economy growing at 2.5% a year. That's $500 billion a year that we leave on the sidelines by not addressing this.
Now, Jeff, you evangelized for this in all kinds of business forums. What is the reaction of business leaders when you present them with this information?
Progressively better as the labor markets get tighter. And most of we are, for those of you not familiar with Fifth Third, we're essentially the bankers to the industrial heartland of the Midwest to the Southeast. And our core client is a business that might have a couple hundred to a couple thousand employees, and often family-owned, multi-generational family businesses. They're deeply invested in their communities, and they're just looking for pathways. I've never had anyone say, I don't think this is the right thing to do. They just need to make sure it makes business sense for them to do it.
Well, since we have a business leader here on the